book's called The Year of Living Biblically, where he spent an entire year trying to live out every rule in the Bible. Not a really religious guy. He describes himself as Jewish, like the Olive Garden is Italian, like sort of. He also wrote a book called The Know-It-All, where he committed to reading the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. Fun reading, great author. And in 2018, he published his book, Thanks 1,000. Thanks 1,000, where he went on a journey to personally thank everyone involved in providing his morning cup of coffee. To which I know some of you are very grateful, and I know that your level on the grumpiness scale is also related to how much coffee you've had this morning. I understand that. So he wanted to thank everyone involved in providing his morning cup of coffee. So that meant the barista who served the coffee taster who selected the roast, the guy who actually roasts the coffee, the guy who made the cup, all the way back to the farmer who planted the beans and grew them. The point he's trying to make is that we often take things for granted, never fully appreciating even the little things. And as a matter of fact, we tend to complain or get annoyed at a much higher rate than we show appreciation and gratitude. Something we talked about a couple weeks ago, that people are 11 times more likely to complain than they are to appreciate, right? And so if not for companies prompting people for reviews like Amazon all the time, most online interactions would be just people complaining. If you don't believe me, go look at Yelp sometimes, right? I can't believe they were closed on Christmas, 1 star. You know, things like that. My cousin owns a deli, and every once in a while he'll post some of the reviews he gets, and they're just ridiculous. Like, my tomato wasn't red enough, or just something stupid like that. Like, wow, you need more time in your life. But gratitude is probably one of the most underappreciated and underused tools that impact our mental health, okay? It can lift us out of depression. It can help us sleep. It improves our diet. Patients with heart conditions actually recover more quickly when they express gratitude. Gratitude actually makes us kinder to strangers as well. And one study revealed that gratitude is the single best predictor of well-being and good relationships, beating out 24 other impressive traits such as hope, love, and creativity. So gratitude in a relationship is a huge factor. So if you're married, being grateful for your spouse. If you're in a small group, being grateful for those people in your small group, those people in your life, that's huge. One monk said this, he says, happiness does not lead to gratitude. Gratitude leads to happiness. And so the thing about gratitude is not necessarily circumstantial. So the Pew Research Council, these guys got out, they found that people in poverty and people who are well off have similar levels of gratitude. People with college degrees have the same level of gratitude as those that did not. The biggest difference in gratitude was found in those who believe in God and those who do not. 62% of people who don't necessarily believe in God reported feeling grateful, compared to 82% of people who do believe in God. And it's amazing then how much faith shifts our perspective. And so this is important because what's good for our mental health is also good for our spiritual health. And so the scriptures constantly remind us of the things that we have to be grateful for. Psalm 107 says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for his steadfast love endures forever." You know, some version of this phrase shows up over 40 times in the Old Testament, usually listing the reasons we have to be grateful. Or Isaiah 12:1, it says this, "You will say in that day, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, for though you were angry with me, your anger turned away that you might comfort me." And come on, let's be honest, is there any more reason to thank God than for his forgiveness and salvation? If you go into Google, if you go into a Bible app or you search give thanks, you're going to find the phrase show up, usually followed by the word for or because. Give thanks for or give thanks because. Because the Bible not only calls us to be thankful, but it gives us all the reasons we should be thankful. And much of this gratitude, of course, has to be pointed back at God because he's the source for so much that you and I have to be grateful for, which is why James says every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. That being true, is it any wonder that religious people are way more grateful than non-religious people? Because we know what we have to be thankful for and who to thank. And we know there's a God who loves us, who blesses us, and then even the worst things in life are simply setups for the best things. And if you weren't at first service, that's what Pastor Tim talked about today, which is God will say no because he has something better for us. And that's kind of fun. And I've said that too, and I think it's so true. And yet, despite the knowledge that we have so much to be grateful for, and that the Bible reminds us that in the end that we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, and those who are called according to his purpose. Despite all this truth, God's people are very famous for complaining. I don't know if you're aware of this. That's the whole vibe of the Old Testament. These guys are complaining. In fact, Paul told the Philippians, he says this, do all things without grumbling or disputing. I always wondered why he felt it necessary to tell them that. Just by the way, guys, stop complaining. Or do this without complaining. Except maybe they already had a history of it. First time I shared this verse as a youth pastor, I had a famously whiny student fact check me. Is that really in there? No, I just put it there because your mom told me to tell you. What? Why do you think that's in there? But it's a reasonable response, right? Because this verse hits a little too close to home for some of us. Complaining is easy. Complaining comes naturally, right? It's our response to disappointment, and when things don't go our way, it's what we do when we feel inconvenienced or offended or unappreciated. Complaining is easy because it puts the onus of our situation on somebody else, right? We get to point fingers at somebody else and say, well, it's them. And it's passing blame, or it's escalating a mistake sometimes to just catastrophic proportions, right? It's like you see these people on Instagram and TikTok, those let me see your manager moments. You put soy milk, not oat milk, in my coffee. Let me make you another one. No, it's too late for that. What's going on, right? And we often presume, it's why? Because we often presume our disappointment and our unmet expectations are a personal attack. And so what do? We act like corner tigers and lash out. How dare you get my order wrong? Whoa, okay. Let me help you out here. One of my favorite In-N-Out stories was this guy came in, he stormed in, and he threw his burger on the counter because it was cold. And the manager looked at it and said, okay, let me make you another one. And so my manager was like, yeah, no problem. We don't serve cold burgers here. So he mounted him a cold burger. And the best part was about halfway through that guy realized that he didn't buy that burger from In-N-Out. He bought that burger from Jack in the Box. And when he made a U-turn to complain, he just walked into the first fast food restaurant that he saw and threw his burger down. And he's like, yeah. So we made a customer that day, but it's like, wow, you're complaining so hard you don't even know what you're complaining about, right? Okay. But if we're not careful, guess what? We're prone to do this with God too. And if we're not careful, we make a complaint about an unfortunate situation, an inconvenience, or some inconvenience, in a personal complaint about God himself, right? That we're attacking God's character, we're attacking God's motivation towards us. And who was notorious for this? The nation of Israel was notorious for this. And you look at the Old Testament, they would complain a lot, right? By the time the 12 spies entered the promised land, the people had been whining and complaining to God just about everything, right? The water they drank, the food they ate. Hey, I know God's supernaturally providing food, but are we having manna again? It's like quail every night. There's only so many ways I can make quail, God. What are we doing here? So they complained, and they begged. Here's the best part. They complained and begged God to rescue them from Egypt, and then after a little bit of time decided, maybe you should just send us back. Maybe it was better there. And so when the spies came back, and 10 of these spies complained about how hard it would be to move in, God had enough. And here's what he said. He said, how long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Okay? And I love this, the fact that the word grumble is in the Bible 3 times in this verse. And if you're wondering what a grumble is, a complaint can be very vocal, but grumble, you've all grumbled, we all grumble. Grumble is what you do when you're mad at somebody, but you want to complain, but you don't want them to hear you. That's a grumble. And it's just that low, it's what your kids say to you when they're walking away. What'd you say? Huh? Nothing. That's right. You said nothing. Keep walking. Never happens in my house. What? Not that I can hear. Grumble, 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 grumble. Here's the best part. God was so tired of their complaints that he actually decided to give them something to cry about, right? And so what do? They ended up wandering the desert 40 years until all the whiners had died. Seriously, it's like, okay, now you guys go, you're going to wander, then all these guys, when they're dead, then I'll let everyone else back in. Have a nice day. Or he just open up the ground and swallow a bunch of them. Hey, but that might seem a bit extreme, but here's the thing about complaining. Complaining is infectious. How many of you know that misery loves company? Right? Complainers, what do? They find other complainers, and then the complaining spreads. So when the 10 spies came back and they complained about the challenges that lay ahead, everyone who was already frustrated just got riled up. So the Bible says this, all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and against Aaron. Look, do you ever have that friend that just wants to vent? You know, just flamethrower you every time you get to sit there? They're going to complain about everything. The price of gas, politics, take your pick. Did you know that it only takes 3 minutes before their stress becomes your stress? That their anxiety, right, up to 3 minutes, right? Within that 3 minutes, whatever they're feeling, you're going to feel, okay? And now imagine a whole nation of people like that, right? How that just spread like that complaining just spread like wildfire through the nation of Israel. And see, the truth is that complaining is way more harmful than just putting us in a bad mood. So brain science has actually demonstrated that just 1 minute of complaining messes with our brains and rewires it like we just had a trauma response, okay? Complaining and grumbling floods our body with cortisol. It shrinks our hippocampus, which is where our memories live, and it activates our fight or flight. Here's a good example. In the Old Testament, the Israelites start complaining. Now, you ever notice that whenever God introduces himself, he says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You know what? And helped you cross the Red Sea. You know why he told them that? Because they would forget. I mean, it was kind of a big deal, but you start complaining and all of a sudden your memory shuts down, right? And so they would forget everything that God had just done for them and would focus on, yeah, what have you done for me lately? Their complaining would lead them to forget what God was doing and had been doing. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but it's a fun fact that sometimes when we're complaining, we forget what's good and right in our life. It shuts off our ability to remember the obvious things. God, I can't believe this ever happened to me. You know, I can't believe whatever, take your pick. I can't believe my car broke down. Yeah, but your car's been running great for 5 years. Yeah, but today. It's like, okay. Right, but don't you remember? Today's today. You're going to be fine. Look, here's the thing. Your prefrontal cortex that's responsible for decision making, it goes offline, meaning that complaining and negativity are making us dumber in real time. You ever wonder why that's why when someone's complaining, like you put oat milk in my soy coffee, what am I supposed to do? And like, I'll make another one. That doesn't make sense to me. Well, why? Because people's brains, and anybody who's worked in customer service, you know this. I'm offering you a solution. That doesn't work for me. Well, what do you want me to do? I don't know. Fix it. Okay. I'm offering you. So if you know, you know. But my point is this. Here's why this is important. We can't be reasonable people. You and I can't be reasonable people if our brains have shut off. Paul says this. He says, do all things without complaining and grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. How can we honor God if we're not thinking correctly? If our memories have turned off and our prefrontal cortex quits operating because we're complaining? How can we be reasonable people that honor God? Peter says this, the end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and be sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. Okay? Self-control and sober-mindedness are incompatible with a brain stuck in fight or flight that has deactivated its critical thinking center. Okay? I've told you this before. Our bodies are a big machine. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. That's how God made us. So when we complain, we throw a wrench in the machine. But things are different when we show gratitude. Well, look, think about this. Paul's description of wicked people begins to make sense when you read his description of them in Romans 1. For though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or what? Give thanks to God. Instead, they became futile in their thinking and their foolish hearts were darkened because they turned their brain off because they complained too much. The good news is gratitude affects our brains as well, and it can undo the effects of complaining. It reduces the stress hormone, cortisol. It also activates the reward centers in our brain and gives us a little bit of a dopamine and serotonin hit, making us what? Feel better, right? It even increases that gray matter in your brain, healing you to process and to think better. Gratitude teaches our brain to filter out negativity, and since our brains are connected to everything else in our body through our nervous system, Gratitude will cause us to physically feel better. Have you ever noticed what happens to your body when you start complaining? It starts maybe in your jaw. It goes to your shoulders. Where do you guys carry your stress? You know? Some of you are like right here. Some of your shoulders. Okay? Some of you right down here in the stomach. Start complaining. You ever just start thinking about stuff and you look down and you're like, okay. You know, and you're like, oh, those are my fingernails on my hands. Okay. That's your body have a very physical and visceral response to that. Okay. But when we begin to do gratitude, the opposite occurs. Those things begin to unclench. Those things begin to relax. Our shoulders begin to relax. Our jaw, you can start to feel everything that was constricting calming down. Weird. It's like God designed us that way. Anyway, here's the thing to remember. Grumbling and gratitude are two roads that lead to two very different destinations. I don't know why it says different destinations. Once you start down one of these roads, your mind begins to rewire itself. Listen, once you go down one of these roads, your mind begins to rewire itself to the path that you have chosen. You are training your brain how to think. Remember, this is about changing the way you think. This is Romans 12:2. This whole series. We're training your brain how to think, and you're either training it to be negative or you're positive. And that's why gratitude isn't based on circumstances, but on perspective. Why is a poor man happy and a rich man miserable? Perspective. Okay? It's not about circumstances, it's about having the right perspective. You know, this is an interesting thing too. A lot of people think, well, once this event happens in my life, it will fix everything and I'll be in a better mood. There's a lot of people that think, well, once I get married, I'll be happy. You know what? You know that miserable single people are miserable married people, right? If you're ungrateful now, you'll be ungrateful then. Whatever it is in life. Once I get this job, things will be better. Will it? If you're already complaining. Look, once you've chosen one of these roads, everything else you do and everything else you see will be through this lens. One hypothesis psychologists have put it out there that gratitude changes the way you see the world around you, which makes sense because once we pick a perspective, our whole worldview changes based on what we choose to focus on. Quick question. When's the last time anybody bought a car? Anybody buy a car recently? Okay? And you know what happens? What? You decide the make, the model, the color, and you know what happens after that? You see every single one of those that's on the road. If you want a red truck, you think I want to get a red F-150, you're going to see every red F-150. Like they all just magically appeared on the freeway. I didn't realize there were so many of them, right? The reality is they've always been there, but you're training your brain now to see them and to look for it. That's actually called the frequency illusion. Okay? Frequency illusion. This means that you are beginning to see things that have always been there, but now you're choosing to see them. Your brain is allowing. See, now apply that to your complaints. Think about that. You apply that to your complaints. You see one problem, you begin to see them all. And it's a snowball effect. And if you pull other people into it, then you begin to feed each other. And you begin to foster this, and this goes on and on and on and on and on. But if it works for complaints, guess what? It also works for gratitude. Because once you find something to be thankful for, you know what else you see? Other things to be thankful for. And if you find something to be thankful for, you're going to see other things too. And then you can share that with other people as well. Because it only takes one person to choose gratitude who sees the good in the world for others to do so as well. And this is what Paul meant when he said that we be shining as lights in the world. I want you to think about those discussions you have with people and those conversations and those times when you have an opportunity at work or at home or at wherever you are. And one person just decides to light up and go off. Like, and what happens is you have other people that can jump in. You know, it only takes one person to just stop it. Yeah, but you know what's good today? You know? What? And it's funny because you'll stop any conversation. You know what, though? I'm so grateful for this. Well, yeah, whatever. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, you know. It's weird how that works. It's called shining as lights in the world. Well, so what? Let's talk about this. Then, if we're going to be transformed in our thinking, like Paul tells us to, then we need to shift our thoughts from grumbling to gratitude, because nothing will change your mindset or your day faster than choosing to walk the gratitude road. And how do we do that? How do we shift from grumbling to gratitude? I'm going to give you 4 things. Number 1, we capture our thoughts. Capture our thoughts. We're supposed to be active thinkers, which means we are aware of our input and what that is doing to us. Okay? Fear and worry and complaining all have these visceral, physical symptoms that reveal to our body where our mind is taking us. That serves as a warning that maybe we are on the wrong path. And so we need to pay attention to what our body is doing, because it's usually an indicator of what our mind is doing. Okay? If you're driving down the road, absolutely white-knuckling it just because you're angry, like, take a second. If you're like, oh, I can't unclench my fists, well, maybe you need to think about that. So don't forget, we're in a spiritual battle. And if the enemy can get you on the wrong path, he will make you ineffective. Paul tells the Corinthians, he says this, though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but of divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. And what? We take every thought captive to obey Christ. Now, it's fun when we get to see guys like what Charlie Kirk used to do and go out there and like have people say these ideas, and he'd be like, let me give you a better one, or let me just give you some truth. We think about that all the time, this idea of taking these things in the world and counteracting these arguments. And it's one thing to do that, but it's also another thing to capture the lies and the frustrations that are in our own heart, our own lives. Those are usually more insidious and more dangerous. Okay? So be aware of what you're thinking, and then be aware of where it's leading you. Okay? Where is this road going? Take control of the snowball before it gets too big and it rolls everyone over. Catch yourself and ask yourself these questions. What am I thinking? And why am I thinking like this? Where is this coming from? And that's usually that's a great place to start and go, wow, this got dark fast, right? You ever had those days? I don't realize I just turned down this dark alley. I don't even want to be here. How did I even get here? Well, you took a wrong turn. Okay, let me step back. Let me go back to the beginning. We back this up. And then what do? We compare it to God's Word, and if it doesn't line up, we toss it. So we have to capture our thoughts. We have to actively be aware of what our mind is telling us and have that gut check. And those destructive thoughts, we can't entertain them. The other thing we need to do is we need to cut off our negativity springs. Right? Once we recognize where it's coming from, we might have to do is cut it off at the source. So maybe that means no more checking the news first thing in the morning. Okay? Turn off your alerts. That's a huge thing. Anyone ever have their phone go off and you just go, turn some of those notifications. I don't care if it's the latest, school shooting or the baseball score. Some of those things, we just need to cut off our negativity springs. Or maybe you avoid that toxic friend at work, or their conspiracy theories, or if you don't have that friend, you are that friend, just FYI. Or you change the subject when they're looking for someone to commiserate with. Remember, what you let in is what will come out of you. Negativity is contagious. Don't let someone else's complaints keep you from experiencing gratitude. That's why it says, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flows the springs of life. If your well is poisoned, what comes out of it will be poison. Then, change your perspective. Let me give you an example. How many of you woke up today and said, well, Sunday, guess I have to go to church. It's my duty, it's an obligation. And then how many of you woke up and said, you know what? I live in America. I'm allowed to practice my faith. I get to go to church today. I get to have discussion. I get to see my friends. I get to sit at a table. I get to hear the word. I get to worship with one of the best choirs and orchestras in Southern California. I get to do all these things, right? So for one person, it's an obligation. And for the other, it's an opportunity. One person thinks of it as mandatory, and the other person sees it as a privilege. And so how do we change our perspective? What other things in our life do we have to do to move from have to get to? Right? You ever think about that? What a difference it would make in your mindset to go from have to get to wake up every day. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I've told you all this, I sold furniture for a living. They say you make a living by what you get and a life by how you live. I made a living, but it sucked my soul. Okay, it was a kind of a 9 years of my life that I didn't anticipate as a detour from ministry. And there were days I'm like, man, I have to go to work today. But let me tell you one of the things that made a difference. The very first day I went to work, I had this binder, and it was just this, I had to keep all my work notes and all this stuff, and I just had it. And the day I was leaving for my first day at work, my daughter stuck a strawberry shortcake Band-Aid on my binder. And I never took it off. Because every day that I went to work and I was in a grumpy mood, there was that sticker. And it reminded me, I get to provide for my family. God has blessed me with this job. I get to put a roof over my head. I get to meet their needs. I get to be off on Sundays because this job lets me do that. I get to punch out and not think about work, which is a tremendous blessing, right? Because I get to sell furniture and then I don't have to think about it the rest of the day. There were a lot of get-tos that little Band-Aid reminded me of, which was just so encouraging to me, because there are things in our life that we make as an obligation. Oh, I have to do this. Ugh. But if we reframe the perspective, I get to, what a difference would that make in your mindset? The shift from have to get to. And that's the difference between complaining sometimes and then gratitude. Because for every have to, there's still a get to. And you just got to find it. And finally, I'm going to challenge you with this. Catalog your gratitude. Catalog your gratitude. Be intentional about what you're thankful for. And a great way to do that is make yourself a gratitude journal. Write some things down. Remember one time I was really upset. I was in a mood. I remember sitting in my brother's room giving him all the reasons life sucked in that moment. And he looks at me and he said, yeah, great. Tell me what you're thankful for. I'm like, shut up. I said, no. He said, tell me what you're thankful for. And I began to do that, and it changed my mood. And I won't forget that. And, I was kind of mad at him for making me do that exercise, but at the same time, I'm grateful because he pulled me out of my funk. He pulled me out of my headspace. So my challenge is that you choose to write down some of the things that you appreciate today. And let me challenge you to write them down. Don't, thumb them in. It's not the same thing. The act of writing connects to our brain in a different way, allowing information to take deeper root in our minds. And so a gratitude list will reframe your mind and your heart faster than anything. It will reduce anxiety. It will dispel anger. It will put you in a better mood, which will lead to things like sleeping better, to enjoying your food more. It doesn't have to be big things. Even a small thing to be grateful for will crack open the door for other things to get through. Start with something tiny, okay? But once you get rolling, you'll see more and more things to be thankful for, and your whole life experience will change. Now, don't get me wrong, I get it. Complaining is easy. Sometimes it's fun, right? Just feel better, right? Vent, get it out. Anyone ever write that complaining letter and then just delete it? I just got it out of my system. But here's the thing. It's also a lot like playing with matches. Eventually, it will get out of control and will get burned. But gratitude, on the other hand, is like a garden, because if you take care of it, if you nurture it, if you water it, it's going to bring you. It's going to grow, and it will bring you joy. It will bring you pleasure for years to come. And a well-nurtured garden will produce tremendous fruit that you get to enjoy. Okay? So listen to this. It is a lot easier to pull the weeds of complaint in a garden of gratitude than it is to try to grow gratitude in the barren desert of grumbling. To get that? Let me say it again. It's a lot easier to pull the weeds of complaint in a garden of gratitude than it is to try and grow gratitude in the barren desert of grumbling. So let's make the shift from grumbling to gratitude before complaining takes us where we don't want to go. All right. Father, thank you for the Word of God. Thank you for the challenge to